Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Nicole Coppell, and I'm the MBA Director. I'm very excited that our popular and highly successful MBA Speaker Series has gone big and has gone viral. The MBA Executive Speaker was launched in 2012 to give MBA students firsthand exposure to business leaders in our region, their knowledge and personal accounts of career paths and challenges. From C-suite executives and entrepreneurs to panels of industry and functional experts, our series event has historically taken place twice each fall and spring semester in our university conference center. Given the many sacrifices we have all experienced as a result of the pandemic, we decided to turn the fact that we cannot be together in person into an opportunity to bring our Executive Speaker Series to you monthly and feature guest speakers from across the spectrum of industries and business specialties without the limitations of venue, travel availability, and of course, the inconvenience of parking on campus. I want to personally welcome you on behalf of the MBA and Graduate Programs Office of the Feliciano School of Business to our first ever virtual and expanded MBA Executive Speaker Series event. Tonight, we're excited to see so many of you in attendance. In our audience, in addition to MBA students, we want to welcome many different students from our School of Business, prospective students, alumni, faculty, staff, and members of our Feliciano School of Business Advisory Board. The format of this evening's session will be a presentation followed by a Q&A session facilitated by our Associate Dean, Dr. Betsy Rossini. Thank you everyone who provided questions in advance, and we welcome you to enter additional questions using the Q&A feature found on the bottom of your Zoom screen and shown on the screen right now. Please understand that we will do our best to have Helane answer as many of your questions as time permits. This has been a team effort on behalf of our MBA and graduate program staff, Dean's Office, Development Officers, Alumni Relations, and the FBUS technical team led by Roger Solomon and Sarah San Gregorio. At this point, I have the honor of introducing my friend and the newly appointed Dean of the Feliciano School of Business, Dr. Kimberly Hollister. We're delighted to have her kick off our virtual speaker series in her first public appearance since assuming this role. Dr. Hollister will be introducing our featured speaker.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for our first virtual Executive Speaker Series event. I am very pleased to introduce myself. As Nicole said, I'm Kimberly Hollister, the Dean of the Feliciano School of Business. I am so pleased to be able to introduce Helane Becker, our speaker for this evening. Helane has over 30 years of experience on Wall Street, holding positions within the research, trading, and investment banking departments of several brokerage dealers, including Citi, Lehman Brothers, and Smith Barney. She's frequently ranked as the #1, 2, or 3 analyst by Institutional Investor magazine, as well as in the top 5 analysts in the Wall Street Journal. Helane is a managing director and senior research analyst at Cowen, covering the airline sector. Helane holds her bachelor's degree from Montclair State University and an MBA from another pretty good business school, NYU. She also serves on our advisory board for the Feliciano School of Business. Helane, thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thanks very much, Kimberly. Thanks for that kind introduction. And I just want to publicly congratulate you on your appointment. It's been really wonderful these last, I think, 5 or 6 years that I've been working with you on the advisory board. And it's really nice that you are recognized for your work and your dedication to the school and everything you've done in your career. So well done and congratulations. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for participating right now. I really appreciate your being here. We titled the presentation Pandemic, Pandemonium, and it's mildly amusing to me because the word pandemic is partly caught up in pandemonium. And that's how I feel like my life has been for the past 3 months. It astonishes me that today I started my 15th week from working from home. If you had told me in March that I'd be working at home through at least September and possibly year end, I would not have believed you. I expected it to be maybe a two week to 4 weeks to flatten the curve, and then, you know, back at work and back to travel. And of course, it's been anything but. So I cover the airline industry. That's been my expert level of expertise, or my expertise, my area for the past more than 35 years. I also cover FedEx and UPS, but they are completely different right now, given ordering from home and so on, online ordering. The B to C, business to consumer, has been very, very strong, which has put pressure on their margins. And I wasn't going to really talk about them. I was going to focus my comments on what life has been like for us on my team. I have 2 members on my team, and we've worked incredible hours at the start. So, you know, I'll divide my comments into January to March, then April, May, June, and what we're thinking about for the rest of the year. So initially in the January, February timeframe, we were seeing pretty good airline traffic, 5.5% growth in January, a little over 2% in February, and then March is obviously when things really fell out of bed. We had the first wave. So we had China. The US government shut down the market to China around January 26th, is when President Trump asked the US airlines to stop flying. In truth, they had already stopped flying in some measure, because the demand was down. Late last year, for an example, United reduced the number of flights they had to Hong Kong, and American had also reduced the number of flights to Hong Kong. Delta did not fly to Hong Kong. So those are your 3 big US airlines flying between the 2 countries. And then within China, obviously there was very little demand that month of January, when China shut down. And our view then was China would lose at least a year of growth. And that's, you know, more or less what's going on. But with the US airlines, we initially felt the guidance they had given us in January after their 4th quarter earnings calls were probably good enough that they would be, instead of the higher end of the range, they'd be at the low end of the range. And with oil prices coming down, you may recall, jet fuel costs and the price of a barrel of oil started coming down in January into February and March, and it's, you know, the bottom was 93 cents a gallon. At that point, we knew, or we suspected, that January, February would be good enough that we'd have we were starting the year off well. And then March. And so initially what we did was, let's say the beginning of March, the week of March 9th, in fact, specifically, we updated all our earnings estimates to account for the lower jet fuel prices, to account for what we saw in January and February. And, you know, we saw the 5.5 go to 2%. So we kind of knew there was a trend on the downside, but we didn't expect to happen what occurred. So we published our numbers, I want to say around March 12th in the morning. And that, I think, was a Thursday. On Thursday night, President Trump announced that the US airlines would stop flying between Europe and the United States. The European airlines would stop. We were effectively closing our borders to people from Europe. And that was because at that point, it was apparent that there was a wave of, there was a wave of pandemic in Italy. Italy had been shut down, and Europe was starting to shut down in some measure, and the US decided to shut its border. So as soon as we published our numbers, they were wrong. So the next morning, I got with my team, and remember, we're working at home from now. So we did a Zoom call, and I said, okay, we have to, you know, these are the assumptions we make. We go through the assumptions airline by airline, we adjust the numbers. And then, of course, on March 19th, a week later, the UK and Ireland joined the ban. And it's not truly a ban. I am totally misrepresenting it. It's more or less a quarantine. If you go to those countries, you just have to quarantine for 14 days when you come back. And those countries are all starting to open now. So We'll see what happens going forward. But those were the specific dates. Beginning March 12th, so let's say March 13th, the US airline industry was not given any warning that the Trump administration would be making this announcement that night. They knew that an announcement was coming. They thought it would be something on the order of temperature checking. They didn't realize it would be a wide-ranging ban or limitation, and they had to scramble. And the first thing every airline did was raise capital. They learned, most of the management teams that are running the airlines now were at all of the airlines, maybe not at the same airline, but certainly in the airline industry and finance, at 9/11 and in 08/09. And the first thing you do when you think there might be a liquidity crisis is you raise capital, and everybody did that. And in fact, we talk about that as being a concern for the March 2021 quarter, because the airlines will have billions of dollars in debt to pay back because they took 364-day term loans, which are very expensive. So we have said, and we expect that every airline will be in the market over the next 6 to 9 months, raising capital. United did a deal today. You may have seen they raised $5 billion pledged against their frequent flyer program. At the end of the quarter, the end of the third quarter, they think they'll have $17 billion of liquidity. They have the ability to get to $20 billion if they take this second government loan. But the point here is, instead of raising capital against aircraft, which airlines will do, they went and raised capital against the frequent flyer program, which is very valuable. The other thing is, immediately raise capital, because you don't know how long the capital markets will be open. And as it turns out, the Fed is being very accommodating. It's so the airlines have less to worry about, but certainly it was all about liquidity, cutting costs as fast as possible, and then the CARES Act, which we'll talk about in a second. April was the worst of it. About 300 million Americans were under some form of stay-at-home order. On April 14th was the absolute bottom. 87,000 passengers traveled on a day when normally we would see between 2 and 2.5 million. The range goes on an off-peak month like February, you'll see maybe 1.5 million, 1.7 million people travel a day. In the peak in the summer, you'll see somewhere around 2.7, 2.8 million. And we flew 87,000, went through TSA checkpoints. That's a decline of 96% year over year, which is obviously, if you're an airline, it's a disaster, because about 55% of an airline's costs are fixed, and there's not a lot they can do. So even though fuel costs were coming down and you saw that entire benefit from lower fuel costs, the airlines aren't really benefiting because they're just not flying as much. And then it was, it's regionally where New York, New Jersey area was the hardest hit, and that's where a significant number of flights have been cut. So we publish our numbers, we publish them, we do them again, we do them again. I guess we did them in between March 12th, let's say March 9th, and when the first airline reported earnings in mid-April, and everybody delayed their earnings releases by about a week and a half. We changed our numbers 4 times, which is, as you can imagine, beyond stressful. As soon as they're published, they're wrong. And I don't like to have stale numbers. Our clients don't, and we shouldn't. The second quarter will be the worst. Revenues we're forecasting for the industry to be down 90%. First quarter revenues were down 17%. Our trend is down 90, down for the second quarter, down 70 for the third quarter, down 50 for the fourth quarter, and then 2021 versus 2019, down 20 to 25%. And just to give you an idea of the comps to like other downturns, so if you look at the second quarter of 02 compared to 01, it was revenues were down 10%. The first quarter of 09, revenues were down 15. The second quarter of 09 was the worst, down 20.2. And then the third quarter down 17.9 before the first quarter of 2010 being up 6.8. In 2002, revenues were $25 billion a quarter. In 2019, revenues were $49 billion a quarter. So we've seen, the industry double, and typically airline traffic doubles every 15 years. So that's pretty consistent. Obviously, we're not forecasting that this year, a 90% decline in the second quarter, and that's fairly consistent, I think, with what most of the airlines are forecasting. But, you know, my point here is that we had updates after earnings, and everybody was in the position of just trying to stay afloat. And one of the things the airlines did was ask their employees to take voluntary leave. So there's three groups of employees. There are your flight attendants in one group. We'll call them your crew, your cabin crew. There are your pilots in another group, and then there's everybody else. Management and office staff, it's easy to make those adjustments. I mean, let me just say that what I'm going to talk about from a furlough perspective is very painful. I know that the numbers that I cite, there's a person behind every number. It's not just a number. I know that there's a person, and I know that person is responsible for supporting a family, whether the family is one person or 5 people. I know how painful this is, and it's not, and I don't mean to sound cavalier or flippant about the numbers, but the reality is the airlines, if you're flying half the amount you were flying a year ago, or in this case, second quarter, 90% of what you were doing a year ago, you don't need everybody. So the first thing the airlines did, and to give you a sense of the number, 750,000 about people were employed by the US airline industry last year. Every one airline job creates 74 other jobs. So travel and tourism is a huge export for the United States. And from my work on the Department of Commerce's Travel and Tourism Advisory Board, I know how important it is to this country. Our goal, when I was there, my last term ended, I want to say, right at the start of the Trump administration. So that would have been June of 2017. So my last term ended 3 years ago. And we were talking about having having 100 million visitors to the United States by 2025. I don't know that we'll make the goal, but all the numbers are at Brand USA, and basically other countries advertise, and the idea behind the DOC's board was to create Brand USA so that the US would also advertise. But having 750,000 people, we forecast that 200,000 people would probably lose their jobs by the end of the year. And typically what happens is the industry cuts from the bottom, especially with pilots and flight attendants. You get a number when you go to work, you get, and you work your way through the ranks over the years. It's very hard for airline people to change jobs, especially pilots, because you have to learn a whole new system and you go to the bottom of the list. You fly reserve for a few years and then you get a line. It takes a while. The pay is very lucrative. 12-year captains flying 777s or 787s are earning $330 an hour. They work about 1,000. They can work up to 1,000 hours a year. If you're a United, Delta, or American pilot flying international, you're probably working closer to 600 hours a year. The math doesn't work otherwise, just because you fly from New York to London for 6 hours. You spend 30 hours on the ground and then you fly back. So you go tonight, you arrive in the morning. So you would go Monday night, you arrive Tuesday morning, you fly home Wednesday. And you know that there's no flying you can do, you know, from London or from Paris or anywhere else within Europe, let's say, in my example. So you just have to wait to fly back. So what we suggested to the airlines was that they think about this. Instead of just furloughing off the bottom, there are 27,000, or there were at the start of the decade, 27,000 pilots that would retire over the next 10 years at all the US airlines. At American, Delta, United alone, it was 23,000 out of a base of 35,000. And at the beginning of the year, we estimated the US airline industry would hire between 35 and 38. So let's just say 35 and 40,000 pilots in this decade. United a year ago said they would intending to hire 10,000 pilots over the next decade, which works out to about 1,000 pilots a year, about 500 or 600 for replacement and about 400 or 500 for growth. And obviously that's out the window. And our suggestion was, what the airlines did initially was they went to all their employees and they said, if you can afford to take a leave of absence, consider taking a leave now. Delta had 39,000 people sign up out of 90,000. American had about 35,000 out of a base of 115,000, and United had the least amount, about 20,000 out of a base of about 90,000 also. But our suggestion was different. It was, you want to win the recovery. So instead of just laying off at the bottom of the seniority list, it takes about a year to train a pilot. Our view was, instead of doing that, why don't you do one of two things? Encourage every pilot who's turning 65, which is the mandatory retirement age, between now and 2025 to retire now if they could afford to do it, and pay them the minimum. So American actually did a version of this. They are paying their pilots, if you retire now, you're paying you for 50 hours a month. They're keeping you on that payroll. They're keeping your health benefits, and of course you get your flight benefits until the day you retire. Then you get your retiree benefits. And our view is that if you encourage all your pilots who can say between the ages of 59 and 64 to accelerate their retirement, basically what you do is put yourself in a position to lower your average wage, because obviously junior pilots earn less money than your most senior pilots. So a lot of the airlines are looking at that, because we talk about, and you probably have heard about, October 1st being an unfortunate day in the airline industry, because that's when the government aid money runs out. So in April, the government agreed to roughly $50 billion in money available for the US airlines, and all the airlines took the grant money, which is basically money that only 30% of the money has to be paid back, in exchange for warrants, kind of similar to the GM program from 08-09, I shouldn't just, GM, but the whole auto industry program in 08-09. The US program is a lot different. Initially, I think the media was very supportive of the airline industry, but it wound up being very unsupportive when an article appeared in Bloomberg, and this is sort of like my favorite thing to do, respond to other people's work, which I don't want to do other than to say it characterized the airline industry program as a bailout. And we didn't think it should be viewed that way. We thought it should be viewed as an unemployment program administered by the airlines, funded by the government. And the reason we say it that way, as opposed to a bailout, is because this is not, the money the airlines are getting isn't designed to go to shareholders, and they're not designed to go to bondholders. In fact, shareholders have lost quite a lot of money, right? You look at where any of these stocks were at the beginning of the year and look at where they are now, and they're down. And you look at any of the 52-week charts, and they're down, and they're down quite a lot. And there was a lot of talk about bankruptcy, and we don't think any of the US airlines needs to file for bankruptcy. And I'm happy to go through why in the Q&A if you're interested. But our view continues to be, this was not a bailout program. It's a program that's designed to pay employees so that you don't put 200,000 people out of work immediately. Because and this is what, by the way, this is what a lot of European airlines did almost immediately. Air Canada did this. They let go initially they're going to let go 36,000 employees, which is almost everybody that works at the company. And then the Canadian government stepped in with some help. And Air Canada only had to furlough. And I say, again, I say this with a lot of pain in my heart. They only had to furlough 16,000 instead of 36,000. But a number of other international airlines didn't get money from their government. LATAM, which is one of Latin America's most profitable airlines, filed for bankruptcy, as did Avianca, which is based in Colombia. LATAM is based in Chile, and the Chilean, Peruvian, and Colombian subsidiaries filed for bankruptcy. The Brazilian did not. But Avianca filed for bankruptcy. A number of European airlines have filed, and they're restructuring. In the US, it doesn't make sense for them to do that because there's not really a lot of stuff to restructure. But I would say that many of the European airlines furloughed people almost immediately, shut down operations. And if you're an airline CEO, that's really the choice. If you have zero revenue coming in and nobody can travel because of the limitations that states put in place or the quarantine rules. I mean, if you go to London, you have to quarantine yourself for 14 days. So why are you going to London? If you're coming from New Jersey to Florida at one point, you had to quarantine. I think that's since been suspended. If you go to Hawaii, you have to quarantine for 14 days. If you go to Alaska, you have to quarantine for 14 days unless you have had a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of your flight. So then you can go ahead in country. But that's not what the U.S. airlines did, and that's not what the U.S. airlines wanted to do. We've said we think it's going to take 3 to 5 years for the industry to recover, it was pointed out the other day that I had forecast 400,000 passengers per day by August 1st, and we reached that milestone. And in fact, 3 of the last 4 days, we had 500,000 people travel. Yesterday, 544,000 people traveled through TSA. That's obviously up from the 87,000 at the bottom, but you're still down 80% from 2.6 million last year at this time. This is the busy summer season. This is when everybody makes all their money. This is when people want to travel. This is when your time is, you have time off. I don't know about you, but our firm has been continually encouraging us to take vacation. And my attitude is, why am I taking a vacation when I can't go anywhere or do anything? Now, as states are opening, we're seeing things to do. Like, there was nowhere to go in April to do stuff. Disney was closed, Las Vegas was closed, but now Las Vegas is open. We're watching those numbers and we're seeing a substantial increase in travel to Las Vegas. We're seeing a big increase in travel to Florida, Texas, the Colorado mountain areas, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana for hiking, Arizona. We've seen a big increase. We've seen big increases in to travel to North Carolina and South Carolina. I don't do the hotel industry, but our hotel analyst, the guy who has the same job I do, just doing hotels, he said one of the things a lot of the hotel resorts are seeing are the drive into resorts, not where you're flying. People may be afraid to fly, but they're not afraid to drive. Those folks are seeing big increases are starting to see big increases. As long as there's something to do, I think people will try to salvage their summer vacation. We think visiting friends and relatives comes first, then leisure. Corporate is going to be, I think, a long time to come back. I would just point out that corporate never came back after both 2001 and 2008. It took actually short haul traffic never came back, and long haul business traffic took about 11 years to come back off the bottom. So the growth has been mostly leisure. We see May, gradual reopening, whether or not to quarantine. And then June, now we have this traffic recovery we talked about. I mean, we call it a recovery, but we're still down at 80%. And then we forecast, and we're already wrong, right? 400,000 by August 1st, so we're already at 500. And then we forecast 1 million for the Christmas holidays. I would just point out that of the 2.6, in my defense, and of the 2.6 million people that traveled every day of last year, about 1 million is corporate and international. And without them coming back, it's going to be very hard to get back to those highs. And I still think 3 to 5 years is the right number, because also there's a really ugly recession that nobody's talking about. 40 million Americans unemployed. It takes a long time. The first thing you do with your unemployment check or your stimulus check is pay your rent. And then you buy food for your family, you do your utilities. But food and utilities are probably going on the credit card. And unlike the government that's putting all the stimulus packages on the credit card, there's you can't print money. You at some point are going to have to pay back the money that you're borrowing. And people have a different relationship with money when they get laid off. I know the couple of times that I've been laid off from jobs because of either merger or merger actually in both cases. I didn't spend and after getting a job again, I never spent the way I spent the first time around. And I've always told my kids, don't ever buy the biggest house or the best car or whatever that you buy the best you can afford, but don't overstretch yourself because it puts you in a different position with respect to your job. If you're an entrepreneur, you know what I'm talking about. If you work, for somebody else, a lot of times you're not in control of your situation. And if you have to go to work because you need that paycheck, it puts you in a whole different position than if you have savings. And something like 40% of Americans actually don't have savings. So it will take a while, in our view, for the economy to recover. Let's face it, if you go to a restaurant and they're only at 50% of capacity, then you don't have to bring back 100% of your staff. You only bring back half your staff. The same is true for the airlines, because now as we head into June and July, we have to think about winning the recovery. As I said, it takes about a year to train a pilot. It takes about 2 weeks to train a flight attendant. So letting flight attendants, furloughing flight attendants a lot easier than furloughing pilots. So what the airlines are trying to do is think about where they need to be when the economy starts to recover, A, and B, if there is a vaccine, or if we learn to live with the disease, which is my personal preference. We just have to learn how to live with this. And if that means wearing a mask, then that means wearing a mask. And you think about wearing a mask for 15 hours, that may be not so comfortable. So maybe you don't go on the long haul international trip, maybe you stay local. And in fact, that's what we think happens. Domestic recovers ahead of international. And that's partly due to the fact that some international countries still aren't flying to the US. Italy is, but most of the others are not. And then, the idea of a vaccine obviously is being talked about anywhere from, later this year to sometime in 2021. I would just point out that the record for a vaccine from development to actually administering it was the mumps, and it took 4 years. So hopefully this is less than that. Hopefully by 2022, it's in the flu shot that we normally get every year. I think just in terms of where we see the recovery, it's if we're wrong and recovery is 2 to 3 years instead of 3 to 5 years, you want to have as many staff on board as possible to be able to add aircraft back. And in fact, American and Delta are doing that for July anyway. One of the things the air industry is doing is to ensure that you feel good about getting on a plane is because social distancing on an aircraft doesn't exist. They're actually thinking about, in some cases, leaving the middle seat empty, in some cases, agreeing to fly 60 or 70% full. Those models aren't sustainable. I mean, right now, break-even load factor is over 100%, but when you add the CARES Act money and you add in the amount of voluntary furloughs that we've seen already, break-even load factor comes down to somewhere between 70 and 80%, and they're flying somewhere between 40 and 50-ish% full. And I know there's probably people out there who've flown already and who are flying on flights that are, fuller than that, which is fine. That's all part of it, but you wear a mask, you'll be safe. The level of cleaning the industry is doing right now is unlike anything that they've ever done before. I think the planes are probably cleaner than they've ever been. I don't think you would, and it's proximity too, right? If you're in the front of the plane and someone's coughing in the back of the plane, your chances of getting it from that person are probably pretty slim. And if you're next to them for 9 hours, that's a different story. But you just don't know. And I think that's a big part of it. It's the uncertainty. And I think that's what has a lot of people concerned about the way the recovery will be. But as I said, our view is that the airlines by keeping flights to 60 or 70% full instead of, last summer's 80, 85, 90% full, they basically keep more people on board on staff, and they don't have to furlough quite as many. We expect just non-union workers management 30% at the big three airlines likely to leave, and so I think that likely to leave by October 1st. We'll know in a couple of we'll know by July 31st because of the WARN Act. You have to give 60 days notice if you're furloughing. So we'll see what happens. But we expect the industry to come out of this leaner, more fuel efficient. We estimate 800 to 1,000 aircraft that are parked will never come back. They're over 18 years old. And, you know, we've already heard Delta, for example, say they're going to retire their entire 777 fleet, American retiring their entire 767 fleet. You know, the average age of the US fleet is going to come down. At the peak, it was probably close to 14. It was not probably, it was actually 14 years. And then we think all the airlines have agreed to reduce their carbon footprint by 50% from 2012 levels by 2050. And we think we'll be there a lot sooner. One of the things Kimberly didn't mention is that I'm on the US Chamber of Commerce's Task Force for Climate Change. And one of the things we've been looking at is just ways, whether you believe in climate change or not, the fact is the temperature is higher, the oceans are higher than they've been in the past, and the airline industry has to take it. We've said has to take the leadership in this area and think about ways to reduce their carbon footprint. And of course, that's what they were doing when this pandemic hit, and now they'll be able to reach a lot of their 2050 goals sooner than they otherwise would have. So I think I will stop there. I think the other thing I have to say is, and then I'll take questions, we'll leave some time for questions. The one thing I will say is the thing about travel that's so amazing and that I've always liked about, you know, being in this industry, and it goes to being in my job too, because no 2 days are ever the same. I could and did have stocks down 20 and 30% in a day in April and May, especially after Warren Buffett announced that he had sold, excuse me, his entire position. And I think there are a lot of reasons why he made that choice. But one of the things that was being reported in the media was that the government was bailing out. As I said before, I didn't view it as a bailout for shareholders, but there was this discussion about whether or not it was a bailout for Warren Buffett. And I think he did not want to be part of that discussion, so sold his position because he took a big loss in it. And as we said to a friend of ours who wanted to sell all of his portfolio when the market was down, that first week I worked at home, March 9th, you know, we said, don't sell because you lock in your losses. You don't have a chance to recoup and you're too young to retire anyway. So don't sell, because once you sell, you've locked in losses. So just wait for a rebound. And if you feel uncomfortable owning the stocks you own, then make the choice to sell, but don't just sell into a panic. So I will stop there and Betsy, see if there are other questions.
Oh, many questions, Helane. Thank you so much. I think we all feel much smarter than we did about 45 minutes ago. I'll start with the question, did the COVID-19 crisis expose deeper issues within the airline industry, potentially extending how long it will take for the industry to bounce back and recover?
So the one-word answer is no. The longer-winded answer is it's a tough industry to begin with. It's capital intensive and labor intensive, and it always has been and it always will be. And it's a service industry and it's reactionary, not proactive. And this is a debate I've had with a number of the CEOs over the life of my career, in that the industry always reacts, right? It reacted in the probably most people are too young to remember this, but in the 1960s, it reacted to when hijackers would come on board and hijack a plane to Cuba. We went to metal detectors. And then after 9/11, we went to, you know, taking our belts off and taking our jackets off and and no knives on board. And then after there was the shoe bomber, our shoes came off. And then after somebody tried to blow up I think it was another plane, it was our liquids had to come out. So they've always reacted. So from that perspective, I think the industry has to figure out a way to stay ahead of the curve rather than always be behind the curve. And that's why I think part of the whole, fleet replacement program that we're in, that cycle right now gives the industry a chance to kind of get ahead of climate issues, number one. Number two, I think the other thing is the industry entered this year in arguably the best financial position it had ever been in. You could argue that the share repurchase programs were wrong. The industry spent almost $45 billion over the last decade returning capital to shareholders through share repurchase programs. But you have to think about what would they have done with that money. And American is a great example, right? They bought back $13.6 billion worth of equity over the last decade, but they also contributed several $billion to their pension plan above and beyond what they had to contribute. And they have to get the plan 74% funded. They have to get it to 80% funded to be fully funded by 2024, which is something that they'll make. But they made a number of voluntary contributions to the pension plan. They also raised everybody's salary. If you go back and you look over the past 2 decades, you had the terrorist attacks in 2001, and then you had a very ugly 2002 recession, and then the industry, for the most part, the airlines all went bankrupt. American was the most egregious. They had never replaced an aircraft, and then in August of 2011, they ordered 472 aircraft to be delivered between 2014 and 2020. And they would have the youngest, most fuel efficient fleet. Now, my opinion of that was that they should have used part of their cash. I don't have a problem. I do have a problem with share repurchase programs. I don't believe in them for a variety of reasons. I prefer a dividend because it's a bigger commitment to shareholders than a share repurchase program. But I also thought that they should use at least half their money to buy the aircraft so they wouldn't be, in the position they're in now. I mean, we estimate at the end of this quarter, so in 2 weeks, they'll have almost $50 billion in debt on the balance sheet. And our view is about $6.5 billion of that is government debt and paid back over a decade. So that's takes you kind of back to 42 billion, 43 billion. And then there's the $3 billion underfunding that they have to catch up on. And so it takes you to 40 billion. And then of the 40 billion, they really only have to refinance the term loans as they come due. The WTCs, or the aircraft financing that they have, that comes due over the next anywhere from 10 to 15 years. And then that debt will be replaced. So they don't have to pay down $40 billion in debt. They only have to pay down 15, which should be eminently achievable in an environment where the industry recovers. I mean, there's a big difference between 100,000 and 500,000. I mean, we're forecasting that at the end of this week, we're likely to see our 600,000 again passengers. So we'll see what happens. Is there another question?
Betsy, you're muted.
Sorry. Next question. Do you envision airlines merging in the near future? And how many more jobs do you think would be lost in such a merger?
Yes. No. I don't think any of the airlines really have the capital to do a merger. Do I think it makes sense? I think the last wave of mergers didn't really prove anything, and we didn't really see significant benefits on the revenue side from mergers. But right now, no one has the currency to do a merger. Everybody's just fighting for survival. This is typically when they occur. Ones that make sense, like JetBlue with Alaska Air, or Southwest and JetBlue. It gives Southwest has $13 billion of liquidity on the balance sheet. They're certainly in a good position They have what I call a fortress balance sheet. They could easily buy another company, especially with shares under so much pressure. But you also are going to run into antitrust issues. American, Delta, United, and Southwest combined are about 75% of the market. So it's really hard to get any of them to do a merger. And then JetBlue Alaska, maybe Frontier Spirit or Frontier Spirit Allegiant. A few years ago, I thought that merger made a great deal of sense, but Frontier is owned by private equity, and their valuation is a lot higher than my valuation for the company. So that deal never got done. Not only my valuation, a lot of people's valuation. Private equity always thinks their companies are worth more than they are in the market.
Thank you. Here's a really interesting question. Do you think airlines will invest in robotics for inside the cabin in order to do tasks like service, catering throughout the flight? And if so, do you think it would be a worthwhile investment?
So I think that's pretty interesting. So here's the thing. Aircraft can already fly themselves. They're the most sophisticated robots you'll ever come across. They can turn themselves on, they can back up from the gate or be tugged out. They can put themselves into, drive, so to speak, get in line, take off, fly, land, park themselves at the gate, and they're done. You don't need pilots on the plane. Now, that said, I don't think you're ever going to get to that. Right now, all aircraft are certified for 2 people in the cockpit, not 1 in the cockpit and 1 on the ground, as people like me talked about a few years ago to solve the pilot shortage. Just 1 in the air, 1 on the ground. But think about the most sophisticated drones that we have. So clearly, aircraft can fly themselves. As far as service goes, yes, I definitely think it's possible that we go to friendly robots at some point in our future. But I would just point out that the airline industry, for as bad as, and I don't want to hear anybody's bad airline story because we all have them. Business travel is such a, I traveled 200, over the last 5 years, I've traveled 250 to 300,000 miles a year for my job. And it's the biggest time suck you'll ever, experience with all the delays and so on and so forth. And robots in the cabin, everywhere in the process make a lot of sense. Do I think airlines will invest in it? Not in my lifetime doing this job, primarily because they all pride themselves on service, and they like a friendly face in the cabin. And I also think, flight attendants are trained. They're there for your safety. People forget that. Flight attendants are trained to get you out of the cabin, to get everybody out of the cabin in 90 seconds in the event of an incident. And I'm sure a robot could do the same thing, but I don't know how people would react to that as a consumer. You probably like having, when you're being told you've got to evacuate now, you probably want a friendly face telling you that, but maybe they go to a mixture of robots and people. Certainly FedEx and UPS have that in almost all their new facilities. They've all gone to fulfillment centers. Amazon's fulfillment centers also are mostly robotics. So, it's a good question. It's just, I think for me, it's probably 5 years ahead of where the industry really is, but it'd be really hard to get that through without creating unhappy workers, and unhappy workers on the front line like that deliver unhappy products, and that equals unhappy consumers, and people won't fly an airline they can't trust.
Good point. Here's another question. Can you discuss how you feel airline ticket refund and reschedule policies might change in light of COVID-19 and in light of pandemics perhaps being predicted events moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. In fact, I had to cancel an international trip, and I live in northern New Jersey, so I fly United a lot. And we were flying, because United doesn't fly nonstop from Newark, we had to connect in Houston. And of course, they canceled, my trip got canceled because it was like the beginning of April. And of course, United canceled the international section of my trip, but they didn't cancel the domestic portion. So I had to take a voucher. And you know, it's fine. We rescheduled our trip once. We'll probably have to reschedule it again. But I think what they did, so this time around was really different. We have never experienced anything like this before, where there was a complete takedown of the airline industry. You know, the industry, I said before that I thought the industry entered this year in the best financial shape it had ever been in. It could easily have survived a 2 to 3-quarter recession where airline traffic was down maybe 4 or 5%. We've never had a situation other than the 4 days after 9/11 where the US government ordered, you know, airlines not to fly so much, and A, and B, actually where we had people who were ordered to stay at home. I mean, I call what I'm doing now Paradise Prison, because I love my home, but here's, like, I've been cooped up literally working from home for 50, as I said, started my 15th week, which is insane. And I think that when you think about the vouchers, so there are two things that could have happened. Many people asked for their money back because their flights were canceled, and they started to change their policies. United was the most egregious. American and Delta were definitely more friendly. American gave you your money back or offered you a voucher. Initially, nobody wanted to give you your money back because what was happening was everybody was asking for their money back. Think about when you buy a ticket, the airline, it's a cash flow business, and they don't build up they don't build up a lot of cash. Most tickets are sold within 90 days of travel. And the further you go, the longer you buy, or the longer the distances between when you buy your ticket. But 60% of all tickets are sold within 90 days of travel. And when airlines were reporting 80% plus load factors, that meant the last 20% was generally your business traveler or your last minute vacation traveler, leisure traveler. But, you know, in general, the money was flying out the door. The cancellations were exceeding the bookings by, you know, a huge factor. And one of the things the airlines were trying to do was prevent that from happening. So they were offering vouchers. American, for an example, offered a 20% premium. So if you had a $100 ticket, you could get a $120 voucher for future travel. And it's debatable how to think about that, because in an environment where you have a slow recovery, the vouchers just kind of sit there. And after a year, they'll probably give you your cash back, or, you know, you might forget to use your voucher. But generally speaking, the recovery is faster if you give the money back earlier, because now you're booking tickets with hard cash. When Alaska Air made the comment last week that they have between $500 and $600 million worth of vouchers they have to work through. And probably what will happen is people will redeem their vouchers first before using cash. I talked to American last Friday. They said they had 129,000 people a day that were flying, you know, up from the bottom. And they should have 500,000. So, I mean, it's up a lot, but still. And they said that people were using cash to buy tickets, which is really what you want. So it's, but yeah, do I think they're going to change I think a lot of things are going to change about the way the airlines do things. I think this goes to the question earlier, you know, about things that change when we come out of this. I mean, I think you'll see, you know, it'll be interesting to see change fees and what happens with them, because, you know, right now you pay a change fee when you have to change your plans, and nobody likes that. So I think the industry is looking at, you know, customer friendly policies, but it's notorious for being difficult because it relies on cash in, cash out. It's so much so that way.
Right. We have time for one last question, Helane, and so we're going to turn this toward you, because a lot of people are interested in your own story. So one of our students asks, what is your favorite part about this position, about your position, and how have you set yourself apart from others in your industry, more specifically as a woman working on Wall Street, which is still predominantly male dominated?
Yeah, it's really, thanks for the question. I could spend an hour just on
I'm
it, but
sure.
I won't. So here's the thing. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I feel like when I started, I graduated, a long time ago. And as I say, as you said, as Kimberly said, more than 30 years of experience, I admit to, less than 40, but I've been out of school a long time. And I think being a woman actually has been an advantage for me throughout my career, in that I'm nice, I'm smart. First of all, I mean, and I don't want this to come off as egotistical, but these are the things I am, and these are the things that make a good analyst. I'm smart. Um, I'm I think my mom told me this, and I know I've repeated it in other presentations. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should do twice as much listening as talking, and you should listen between the lines. And that is a skill that is hard to develop. Um, and when you think about it, think about when you talk to somebody. Most people, when you're talking to them, aren't thinking about what you're saying. They're thinking about what they're going to say next. And the art of listening, and I think there might even be a book that talks about this too. It's really hard to develop that skill. And that's one of the things you need in this job. You really need to listen, because you come to any job with preconceived notions. And, I come with a bias. Either I like American or Delta or United or whatever. And I try very hard through my work, and I've always tried to do this, is make sure that I always just follow the numbers, and I don't impute my own, like, ugh, United's a crappy product, I'm not recommending the stock because of it. More like, what is United doing that's changing the fact that they deliver a crappy product, and blah, blah, blah. So I've always tried to find I tried to listen really well. The numbers, I mean, that's really easy, because the numbers are the numbers. You just do the calculations, and they do what they tell you. And then and then the other thing, I said, I'm nice. People like talking to me. And because I'm a good listener, people tell me things I shouldn't know. I mean, both personally and professionally. Like, I can tell you things that people have told me over the years, but I wouldn't, because I also keep a secret. I don't share information with other people. If you tell me something, unless it's, public information, I won't share it. And I'm very good at that. And then the best part of the job is that you get to talk to amazing people, and you get to meet amazing people. And here's where I hope things go back to some level of normal soon. Because if you're established in any career, you've got your network. But if you're not established, you're building your network. And the fact that we're all working from home and doing Zoom meetings is just not a lot of fun. You like to be with people. We're social creatures, and you want to build that network. And that's another part of the job that's fun. And all the work I've done over the years, being part of the Department of Commerce's Travel and Tourism Advisory Board, I mean, I met pretty interesting people. Who do, like the head of Las Vegas Convention Center, and the head of the tourism board for the city of Miami, and the woman who owns a railroad in New Hampshire. So I've met really amazing people. And then the other thing is in the companies. I mean, how can you think about it, like, I started as an analyst when I was in my mid-20s. I mean, I was 25 years old, and I was talking to the chief executive officer and the chairman of the board of, like, major Fortune 500 companies, FedEx, American, Delta, United. I mean, where else can you do that? If you're a 25-year-old in finance, you have no clue who the CEO has no clue who you are. But here I was, having that option. So, I mean, it's a great job, and it's a great remote job, because even though you have to travel a fair amount, you really don't. You can do a lot of stuff on the phone. I've gone through, when my kids were little, my kids are adults now, but when they were little, I didn't travel 200,000 miles a year. If I traveled 50,000, it was a lot. And I made sure I was there for every important event. I think in their whole lives, I missed two. One was something I didn't even know about. It was a Christmas, a holiday song fest that I had no clue what was going on. And then, because my son didn't tell me. And then he missed a birthday party because I didn't know about it. But that was it. I was there for everything because I worked at home. And what a great job, because you can do that. I mean, and no 2 days are the same. It's I think it's pretty awesome being in this career.
Well, we think you're pretty awesome, Helane, and we thank you so, so much. I'm going to turn this back over to Kimberly for a second, and then to Nicole, and we'll say our goodbyes.
Thanks everybody.
Helane, thank you so much for all of your insight into what's been happening in the industry and your career. We're really fortunate to have you not only here tonight, but on the board and a friend of the university. So thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thank you.
This is Nicole again. I'd like to thank you very much. You are correct. You are very nice. Your delivery is so conversational, and it was just enjoyable to hear you speak. And I didn't even realize the time had flown by, because Betsy's right. We are all now much smarter than we started about an hour and 5 minutes ago. And we can't thank you enough. This was quite impressive for our inaugural virtual executive speaker. And beyond everything you've done, and we are particularly very proud that you're an alum and you represent Montclair State so well. And hopefully some of our MBA students and undergrad students might be able to follow in the type of steps and career that you've had. And we hope for them good luck, and I hope that you would be a great role model for them. I have a slide I want Sarah to put up right now, if that's okay. As I mentioned, this is going to be we are now starting this as a series. We normally did not have any type of executive speaker over the summer months, but again, given the fact that we are staying at home for the most part, we felt this was a great opportunity to step up this executive speaker series. So this is going to be a monthly series. We have their next 3 speakers already lined up, so please go ahead and save the date. As you can tell, all 3 of them have big titles at really important and interesting companies, having a lot to tell us, and not only about their particular industry, but the effects of COVID and what's happening now in their career paths. So please, this next one up is on Tuesday, July 14th. We hope you will join us, and then again on Wednesday, August 3rd, and then Monday, September 24th. And we are planning on having that right throughout the fall and potentially even into the spring. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Helane, for being absolutely amazing. And have a great night. Take care.